Hello everyone, it's Alex from BoardGameCo, and if you've been watching this channel, you may or may not have already known that this interview is coming, but today with me here we have Luke Peterschmidt from AEG. Hello, Luke.
Hello.
And Luke offered to, after the whole Dead Reckoning Kickstarter, Luke offered to do an interview with me to talk about the campaign, to talk about the industry in general, to talk about his experience with the campaign, with AEG, and this is basically a conversation. There are different points we'll definitely try to touch upon, but at the end of the day, this is basically a conversation. And to start things off, just because, why not? Luke, what's your favorite game and why?
Oh, tough one. So, Magic the Gathering is hard for me not to mention. I was never very good at it, but Magic the Gathering was the game that sort of exploded the industry in the early 90s, which gave me the ability to get into the industry. So if I'm not thanking Peter and Richard, I'm kind of a jerk.
Peter? Who's Peter? I know Richard.
Peter Atkinson. He was the CEO of Wizards of the Coast.
Gotcha. I am not familiar with Peter at all. I mean, Richard Garfield, obviously we know. He's still designing board games nowadays. Magic the Gathering is something I did play for a good few years. I actually started my own little Magic the Gathering online store when I was back in Canada for a few years. In the end, after I was sorting cards, I just realized I wasn't paying myself enough to actually do this. But it is definitely a huge influence in my life. But then when I got into board games, I kind of decided I have to pick one. I can do Magic in its all-consuming state, or I can do board games. And I chose board games.
I think I played one Friday Night Magic in the last 3 or 4 years when some friends asked me over. But it's super important to my history. And then I play a lot of cribbage with my family. And I find that most people's favorite game is the game that they play with the people they like to play games with the most. So my family's always been a gaming family. So cribbage is our kind of go-to.
That's fair. I've never really played cribbage. I've played Rummy is it Rummy Cube, Rummy Cub? I don't even know. Yeah, but I played that one. I played, I don't know. I played a bunch of those things, but mostly, nowadays I'm trying to think what I play with my family. Baron Park. Baron Park is a huge family game on our end. Nice tile laying game. But yeah.
Yeah, for my family, I'm talking about I have 4 older sisters and an older brother, and my parents,
You're talking about more growing up kind of situation.
Yeah, and still today. And oddly, cribbage is a game that's played on a lot of ships, which is why I guess I'm on a ship right now. Because the pegs don't follow when the ship moves. It's a game that has pegs on a board. So
the things you learn.
And if you're ever in Nova Scotia in a bar and you want to play a game, you don't have one, you can ask the bartender for the cribbage board, and they will always have one in any fisher town.
I've never been to Nova Scotia, but it's good to know.
Here's this trivia guy.
Secondly, just again randomly, do you back any Kickstarters?
Yes, all too many and of all different types.
What's an example?
I have a pair of
Kickstarter highlight reel. Either things that have worked out well for you, things you've actually just excited about.
There's a game called Expedition that I really, really liked. It was like a role-playing card game that used an app in a very, very clever, simple way. I have a pair of shoes from Kickstarter from a company called the Boston Shoe Company that are awesome. Probably my favorite game on Kickstarter I've ever got is actually a pretty simple game by Mark Corsi called The Game of 49.
Oh, that game was on Kickstarter?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I did not know that.
I've been doing this, that was like 2014, I think.
Wow.
Actually.
I mean, I've seen that game. That's like the red box, right?
Yes.
I've seen that game. I've never played it. I would never have thought that was a Kickstarter game.
Yeah. I mean, in the early days of Kickstarter, it was everything went on Kickstarter. And I played that game at the first Unpub I went to, which was probably in 2013. And he was there. He was by far the most professional person there. Had sheets for everyone to fill out, who play tested the game, got your email address. Super nice guy, and just a great game. So really enjoyed that.
It's solid.
Yeah.
Okay. And then before we jump into Dead Reckoning, which is to a certain degree the framework for this conversation, either Kickstarter in general, Dead Reckoning, or different things about that, I just want to touch upon 2 brief things just from my own stance, my own background. Just some of these things my audience already knows, some they don't. And the first one, which is it's not something I've talked about on the channel before, but first of all, I do run BoardGameCo, the YouTube channel, obviously, but I also run BoardGameCo, the board game shop, and we've been doing business since 2012. And I just want to put this out there as a frame of reference that if you Google stuff enough, you'll find times that I have done things that I wish I hadn't, times I've said things that I wish I hadn't, meaning primarily in terms of responding to customer service issues. Meaning I have my own history of just starting off and trying to resolve an issue and then not realizing what the customer side of things are. And it takes time to get there, and there's things I regret. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because part of the framework for this conversation was talking about, Dead Reckoning and some of the upset customer sides of things. And in no way am I pretending that it's complicated. I mean, this is something I'm sure you know. It's complicated. It's always hard to make everyone happy. You always take into account your side of things, and it's rare to take into account the other side of things. And this is something that we unfortunately see all too often, the concept of people just being right or being certain about the stance that they have and not being certain of not taking into account anything else. So that is something that I wanted to just bring up briefly, just before I get some comment about, but you've done this and this. Sure, I have. That's reasonable. And then secondly, this one my audience definitely knows, is I'm a huge CMON fan. And again, the reason I'm bringing it up is because CMON, while I love their games and while I love the people who work there, or the people I know who work there, I recognize fully that they tend to rely on a lot of marketing tactics in Kickstarter that people aren't necessarily a fan of. And they often get a pass from me, not because I just agree with everything someone does, but rather for two counts. One is I think they do deliver a great value for the money, and two is because I've come to learn and understand and expect what a CMON campaign looks like, including all the tactics. And so it's not that their tactics are great, it's that I think expectations matter. Someone once said that, I remember a quote I once heard, that happiness is expectations minus reality. That understanding what to expect often changes the whole picture, and that is some of the complaints we'll touch upon about the Dead Reckoning were expectations. We'll come to that later. But I want to explain why sometimes I'm a fanboy of CMON, but I brought up a whole video about Dead Reckoning and the expectations there.
Yeah, I think there's another great quote that's happiness is deviation from the norm.
Same, yeah, exactly.
Which is very similar. So real quick, on the customer service thing, I had an employee at my last company named Jordan Martin, and his famous quote about customer service was, "It's like investigating serial killers. If you do it long enough, you become one." It is really hard to do customer service on a very tactical level. Like the number of times you'll get an email. Remember there was an old joke about, "Hey, my computer's broken, the cup holder doesn't work anymore," and they meant the DVD tray that came out, right? The number of times someone will send you an email that says, "I'm missing 4 pieces to the game," no address, no mention of what game they're talking about.
I get this all the time. I get people who are like, my game is missing pieces, and I'm like, okay, well, I need to know something about you. Something. Yeah. And by the way, and sometimes, and this happens, always is amazing to me, sometimes it's not even from the email or name of the actual order. So it's not even like I could have looked it up because you gave me nothing to go off of. Yeah. People always expect that everyone else is in their heads with them, that people that you know what's going on, that you see things from their side, and it's just not true. And it leads to so many of the arguments we see on the internet of just, instead of trying to, arguments often are presented as a way of being right as opposed to trying to see things from the other side.
Yeah, and the challenge of the internet is twofold, right? So like all communication is, I think of an idea, it passes through my filter, which is my entire life experience, where I was born, how I was raised. That message goes through my filter, it goes to the world, and then it comes back to the listener through their filter, right? And part of that, and then goes, gets translated. So if I'm talking to someone with a very similar background to me, I can very easily communicate my thought effectively, one-on-one. When you communicate through the internet, it goes through your filter and then goes to 1,000 different people. Yep. All who will choose to interpret it, all who will interpret it based on their own filter and how they see the world. So for doing one-to-many communications online is super challenging. And it's why a lot of times conversations don't even start, because the person trying to move the ball forward knows that'll be misinterpreted, not as the fault of the listener, but as the fault of the communication platform. By a huge number of people, and will just cause more questions and problems.
And I think an excellent example of that, it's interesting, it's that while to a certain extent what triggered this interview, this discussion, were people being upset about certain things in Dead Reckoning's Kickstarter, at the same time, this was AEG's highest funding Kickstarter to date, and then for every person who was upset, there were 4 people in the comments defending it. Meaning, going back to that messaging of how it filters to different people in different ways, there were so many people who were thrilled or happy or defending everything about the Kickstarter that people take things in different ways. This is not some giant thing of, oh no, look what a failure this is. This is just the opposite. This is a huge success with people who are unhappy.
And one of the things that as a marketing person I have to do is I have to look at people's actions, which is not just what they say, it's what they do. So I mentioned I was a Games Workshop fan back in the day. I would hang out at the Games Workshop store, and I was in college at this time, and I would watch someone go to the counter and go, "I can't believe this new game is $60," and hand over $60. And then the guy who worked there, who was a friend of mine, would come around and go, "You know what I just heard? Blah, 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 blah. Here's my $60. Right? So you have to be really careful about listening to what people say and what people do. So in this campaign, just to not jump ahead, we did not anticipate a desire for the all-in game pledge. When those comments came through, we didn't interact with those people, but we absolutely paid attention to the people who wanted the all-in game pledge. We didn't ask them questions. We didn't, because it was just going to cause a spiraling nightmare of impossible to, especially the way Kickstarter is organized. Yeah, and the way Kickstarter is organized, it's not easy for me to communicate on a thread and then have another comment push that thread down and start. It's just not a good great platform for that. So
sadly, I find Kickstarter's best if you have the time and attention. It's best maneuvered on the PC so you can respond in threads, and then on your phone so you can be watching everything that's new popping up. It has to be like both, because the phone doesn't have the comments, so it doesn't have threaded comments. So it's like you need this hybrid of platforms. It's really not set up well.
It's not set well. So, but we did pay attention to those requests, and we're like, you know what, that complaint is completely valid, and it was. It sounds like this was an easy thing for us to do. It wasn't, right? AEG is a large company. I don't know what the total employee count is, but it's getting near 20 probably. For us to move like that is it's like a big ship shifting directions. We didn't quote out shipping that way. You might think of, who cares about what the shipping costs are? Oh my God, it's such a huge deal. And not just shipping costs that you get. So one of the ways we try to make things more affordable is we try to pack them out, on this campaign at least, in a way that it's cheap for us to take what came from the factory, drop it in a box, and send it to you. Every time a person in the pack-out facility, and you know this if you have a pack-out facility for your store, every time they touch something, it costs you money. So there's these weird, like, okay, we made this happen. Uh-oh, what just happened, right? Because when you get if you were a legendary pledge backer, you'll see that the Sea Dogs and the Ghost Ship and maybe Saga 1 will be shrink wrapped to the main box to prevent damage. Can't do that for the game only pledge because we didn't plan for that for the game only pledge. So it is a mess.
I get these things all the time where, like, again, we run a used game store. It's not all used games, but it's exclusively has a lot of used games, and we'll get people who are like, oh, hey, can I get what's the edition on that game? And I'll check it up because, well, I won't, but I have someone check it up because of course I'm going to do that. And then once I do, they're like, oh, actually, I didn't want that. I actually want to know something else about the game. I'm like, every time someone goes and touches that game, it is money. It's a factor. It's part of running a business, but it's a factor in those costs that I have to pass on to the customer. It's, of course. I've never had a problem with costings. And speaking of voting with your dollar or watching people's actions rather than their words, everyone always wants things cheaper. The question is, what are they going to do? What makes sense to them? What are they willing to do, and all that?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a car guy, and there's been a couple times in my life where I've had small windfalls. I sold a company to Games Workshop, and I was the game designer for Bakugan, that little plastic ball thing. And those were both pretty good windfalls. Oh, and I worked at Wizards of the Coast when we did Pokemon. That was pretty awesome, too. But I couldn't make myself buy the car I really wanted, even though I had the money. Because to me, I was thinking like you do, which is like, ooh, that value just seems like it's a sports car with 2 seats and 4 wheels, but here's another sports car with 2 seats and 4 wheels that's way less expensive. Couldn't make myself do it. But what I didn't do was go, that other car I really want is too expensive. I just made my decision and moved on. Like that was...
Yeah. So I think it's interesting because something that I think we see in Kickstarter, and we see this both in the people who are upset on Kickstarters as well as the people who are defending Kickstarters. And again, Come On is a common example of where this happens. But I think the more someone cares about something, the more it's hard to sometimes just move on, especially because of the collapse. There's a promise of what Kickstarter is or was, and while that promise is not carried out in real life to a large degree, everyone still has this vision of it, this collaboration aspect, building a product together, being part of the community. And I understand, I don't in any way ever justify anyone who is being aggressive or attacking on either side of an equation.
Sure.
That's just you prioritizing a different value system than the one I have. But I do understand people who want to try to influence change, who want to try to be a part of the conversation, who want to present their opinion because it might matter. And while all too often, like voting is a great example of this, all too often it can feel like your vote doesn't matter. But because of the comment section on Kickstarter, sometimes it can feel like your vote does. If you have enough people agreeing with you, then it's suddenly there's a reason to chip in. There's a reason, and again, hopefully respectfully, and this is the part, unfortunately, is not always there. But I understand people wanting to inspire change for sure.
Yeah, I do too. But it is interesting that that the Kickstarter format is so unique because I've done some weird things on Kickstarter. My last company, Fun to 11, we had a bunch of board games. Like we had the 6th largest board game ever on Kickstarter, and it was $60,000.
What was that?
It's Castle Dice. That's how long ago
Castle Dice was the 6th largest Kickstarter at the time?
Well, at the time, yeah. And it was $60,000. That's how long ago it was. So I think Kickstarter is amazing. It doesn't lower the bar to entry to 0, right? Because you still have to have the time and energy to do it. But my last company, which made board games, the same employee, Jordan, who made that customer service quote, came to me one day with an idea. He said, I want to make this. And we made these on Kickstarter because we could. This is a unicorn.
Okay.
And he has a rainbow scarf that comes out his butt. So you can wear this as a scarf. And I told him,
where can I get those? My daughter would love that.
Send you one. Or you can go to fun11.com, I think. Anyway. Okay. Yeah. So what I love about Kickstarter is Jordan had ideas all the time. And that idea that he came in with, it wasn't a board game. I didn't care. I said, you have 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, all the way through the process, put on Kickstarter and got to make it. Kickstarter can be magical. But for board games, big, expensive board games, Kickstarter has a whole other thing that does, which it lets a company like CMON, come on, I don't know what's the right way to say that now.
They've gone back and forth. I believe the official pronunciation is come on, but I have heard some of their own people on videos still saying CMON. So either way, you're fine.
Okay, Eric Lang's company, I'll call it that.
My favorite, by the way, my favorite one is on Twitter at one point. They posted, this was recently, like 6 months ago, maybe something. They posted on Twitter, we've heard the debate, we understand, we want to clear it up. The way you pronounce it is come on. But it's all in text.
Yeah.
This is being a joke. It's like, come on. Yeah.
So what it's done for board games is it's allowed massive games like their games to exist. Those games can't exist any other way. Dead Reckoning could not happen through retail. It's just impossible. The risk you would take would be so big.
Is it about risk or margins, both?
It's both. It's both, right? So, I mean, I don't think CMON could get their games into retail at those prices.
Not with the extra content. They can get them into retail, but then they take out a ton of the content to do so.
Yeah, I mean, there's the standard markups in this industry vary widely, and I would never judge a company by their standard markup because every company has wildly different goals and aspirations and cost structures. And I'm not going to tell someone else what's the right amount to pay their staff, right? And that's what you're telling a company when you say you're charging too much, or what's the right amount of profit to have for growth. Like those two things are you questioning what they're paying for rent for their office and how much they pay for their tech guy, right?
And how much they pay themselves. It's a factor too.
Yeah, but generally in this industry, the way people get rich, right, is owning a company that does really well and gets bought, being on a royalty on a product that does really well, or being on a royalty on like a dozen products as a game designer that all do good. Right. That's sure. Very few staff people at game companies get rich. There's been exceptions, obviously. But the other thing is exactly what you said. The margins are so poor, and margin is just the fully loaded cost of a product, how much revenue someone gets for it. And these games, there's a reason these games didn't exist pre-Kickstarter. I mean, what was the biggest game pre-Kickstarter? Games Workshop.
Pre-Kickstarter.
The most expensive, biggest games, right? Kickstarter has allowed these games to happen. So while it's not, the Pollyanna, that Kickstarter was originally designed to be, which is a dream fulfillment platform. I actually spent some time at Kickstarter offices when they were pretty new, and they were determined to be not about making money. It was actually built into their core documents that the investors were never going to get their money back.
Interesting. The investors insane. In Kickstarter.
Yes, yeah. They really thought they were doing a universal good, and they thought they would be doing things like dance troupes and great literary works and that type of thing.
So more like a GoFundMe as opposed to like GoFundMe. I think is more of that supporting as opposed to business.
Yes, yeah, and the businesses they were hoping to start would be things like cupcake shops, right? Gotcha. And then it just turned into a place that apparently is mostly board games now.
Yes.
After Gloomhaven or Frosthaven, that's pretty much what they do. So, but we all should be thankful that these big games can exist through Kickstarter because they can't exist any other way.
For sure, I am, and I think one of the things, and this is, I'm just taking your side straight up on this one because I already know, but I think one of the things that was, I guess, different speaking of expectations, that was different about a Dead
Yeah.
Reckoning is when you compare Dead Reckoning to some of the other kinds of games that are made. Let's say, are you familiar with Foundations of Rome?
No.
So Foundations of Rome, it's like a polyomino game that was done by Emerson I can't pronounce his last name. I'm terrible at the names. Emerson, whatever, Matsuchi, I think. I don't know. Designer of Spectre Ops, a few other games. I think he's designer of Century Eastern whatever, the Century series, Century Spice Road. But they did a large Kickstarter that was Kickstarter exclusive only, and it was basically all these miniature sculpts in a polyomino game. So it was a polyomino game that was like more of a gamified polyomino game, but like every single polyomino was its own unique miniature sculpt. And then you compare it with Kaman, or any miniature game, Kaman, Awakened Realms, Tainted Grip, Mythic Games, any of these games that they're producing a ton of miniatures. And I think Dead Reckoning, they had more of a perception of, okay, well, the box size is decent and there's not really a lot of miniatures, but I know with these games, the cost is the card crafting. Those specific cards.
Yeah, there is that challenge too, that perceived value and cost to produce are not always connected. It used to be, for instance, and it changes. So it used to be that getting a figure made was I'm rounding these, right? Sure. A $50,000 molding charge to cut a steel mold. That's what it cost for every sprue or every unique, however many you could fit into a fairly small spot. That number is a tenth of that now, because they're using beryllium copper, which is a different production form, right? But everything I just said, no customer needs to know, right? Doesn't matter. But it does mean that some of these games are now possible with miniatures that weren't before. Once you have a mold, I don't know this for sure, I haven't done miniatures in a while. I'm going to guess a miniature is substantially cheaper to produce than a card, than a clear card.
They're pretty cheap. I don't know the number either, but I know that they talk about like the cost of the mold.
Yes, yeah, and then you amortize that over your print run. So you can't really amortize the cost of a card crafting clear card over its print run, because most of the cost is not the art that goes on it; it's the production. Which in this case, if I understand correctly, has the cards leaving one country in the middle of production and going to another country to be finished.
They're producing two different countries?
Yeah, yes, in the middle of the process. Okay. So the card crafting cards for Dead Reckoning are printed on both sides. I don't know how many runs through the press they have, but it's a lot. Sure. I didn't know this till I started working at AEG. Printing on plastic I always knew was hard. Printing on clear plastic is super hard, because the way you can print on plastic is you put a film down first, but then it becomes not clear, right? Yeah. Then when you cut them, like you'd have this big sheet of plastic and it goes through a round of pizza cutters. And then it goes through around a pizza cutter sideways and it makes them a square.
Mystic Veil, and you may not know this, I don't know. Mystic Veil, I believe, is not clear plastic, correct?
Yes, it's got a film on it, and you can pull that film off.
I've never actually played the game, but I remember pulling off those films at one point.
Yeah, that was probably to protect them during drying. So
it's interesting, because one of my questions was going to be, why is Mystic Veil different than Dead Reckoning, which I think you just answered.
I can't. Like I said, I've only been in AG 4 months. I don't know the Mystic Veil production process, but the margins are tough. Sure. And then cutting it, the plastic stretches when you cut it. Paper doesn't. So I think I'm right. The reason it's going from one place to another is for a different cutting process, because it can't be done. And all that stuff is hidden from the backers. And I don't expect them to understand that or know it. I just expect them to look at the game and say, is this game worth the amount of money to me? Right.
But they won't. That's at the end of the day. That's reasonable, because I mean, I think I have a very different opinion, because I run a company, I run a business, but whenever something's not evident to a backer, and especially with this concept of, well, there are companies out there that are just trying to rake it in. There are evil entities out there who are trying to make money. I'm all for making money, but I believe in general people will try to charge what they think they can reasonably do, because you also want customers. But I think that a lack of knowledge, I think it's important to the customer to know these things as much. I think if AEG had done a video of like the production elements, the different things that go into, like, I knew with the card crafting, I didn't even think about the fact, and when I say think, I mean as soon as you say it, it's obvious to me. But of course, cutting cards is easy. Cutting plastic is not. It's course inherently it's just plastic as opposed to a piece of paper. But like, I think the more a customer knows about what goes into these things, the more they understand and can move past that companies are evil, they're just trying to make more money off of me concept.
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, I thought very much along the same lines. One of the very first updates we did to that Kickstarter, I interviewed the production guy and asked him questions about stuff to try to bring some visibility to it. there are limitations to how much that you can do.
Sure.
And once a conversation started after that interview, which people probably didn't even read, even though it was on one of the first Kickstarter pages.
I don't remember. I mean, I think I read every update. I don't remember seeing that.
Oh yeah. There's an interview with Dave. He's called China Dave on our thing. Anyway, Dave Lepore. So yeah, Dave Lepore did an interview on some of the challenges and how much. Now we didn't compare it to miniatures because then we would have had to explain miniatures production the longest. We compared it to regular playing cards, right? Which I
think is reasonable.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, I'm never going to be able to communicate, and I don't think I should have to. And most companies don't communicate their cost process. There's a whole company that does nothing but break down iPhones and then tell people what the raw goods cost of an iPhone is. And it's like, I think the last iPhone's $200 and something. And they charge $1,000 for it or something.
I think that goes back to the community nature of Kickstarter. I understand. I agree. I mean, you don't get into nobody sits there and tries emailing, Apple to find out why their phone costs so much. This doesn't happen. But
it's not the process. It's not the process for anybody. And Simon wouldn't do it either. Simon wouldn't tell you what a sculpt cost.
I think to a degree. I mean, I think some of these things are helpful. We do live in a smaller space, and especially on Kickstarter, there's this illusion of community. This illusion of, I mean, there's responsiveness. Without that community, without that back and forth, there wouldn't have been a gameplay pledge, which you ended up doing. So you are engaging with the community at the same time. I don't think there's any obligation, but
yeah, no, I will engage with the community about all sorts of topics. Price is definitely one I don't, especially in that one-to-all communication style. I've never seen it work, ever.
Just because you're saying no one will be happy in the end.
There will always be someone who wants a little more. At Fun to 11, we ran a Kickstarter for our Epic PvP game. And we had the most annoying backer, I'll just call it, the most annoying backer I've ever experienced. Constantly negative. And a grade A troll. Like, if you wanted to learn how to troll, he was good. Because once it got clear he went too far, he would back up with some question, right? That seemed like a non-issue. Like, why aren't you answering Steve's question about who the artist is? Because Steve just wants to start a conversation so he can yell. At the end of that campaign, after he spent 20 days really ruining it for a lot of people, he backed at not only the highest level twice. And I actually sent him an email. I thought you hated this whole thing. And he goes, no, I just wanted to see what kind of free stuff I could get by being a jerk. It usually works. So my assumption is once a campaign reaches a certain success level, you will have one, I'm just going to call him Steve. Sorry if there's any Steves out there. You will have one Steve. And you can't. And they're pros. Like, Steve's a really good troll. Really good. Meaning if you ignored him, he had tricks to make you not ignore him. And then once you engaged, he would just go right back to his trolling. So it's very hard for me to communicate when there's one or more Steves out there because they're just going to hate everything I say and want more free stuff.
I don't in any way think you have to appease. Again, have to is the wrong word. I don't think in any way you should try to appease everyone. There's always going to be someone. I mean, like I said at the beginning, like, I've done customer service stuff and I've done things that I regret and whatever. Yeah. But even nowadays, I'll have people who I can't make happy, and I think that sometimes it's just life. The regret part is there's accountability for your actions. I'm accountable for my own actions. I'm not accountable for someone else's. And so I believe I will do what I think is reasonable. I will never try to move past that. It doesn't make sense.
I like this format to discuss these topics is great, right? It's two people having a conversation wearing blue shirts. It's apparently
not planned.
But it's a more give and take. Like, if I misspeak, you can ask for clarification, right? Which you can't do once you've hit send on a thing. And I want to be clear, like, we did listen to backers and we read all of the comments that were out there. It's just we choose not to engage in certain comments when we know there's no effective way to communicate. And again, at the end of the day, if we told the backers every single cost on our product.
No, you can't. I mean,
if we did, then the argument would be, well, how much money are you making?
So I was about to say, because my thing is being completely 100% transparent works when you're not making any money. So to give you an example, right now I'm doing this YouTube thing. I have a Patreon. I make a little money there. I get ad spend. I make a little money there. But I also just bought a $3,000 camera yesterday to improve my production quality. And it's a camera plus accessories plus whatever. I was speaking to Quackalope, a channel I work with. He does production quality. I just want to try to up my game a little bit as much as possible. And I think if you're doing a daily video, it's a worthwhile investment. But right now, that means I can have a conversation where I tell people, I'm making nothing. I'm literally out money doing this YouTube thing. But my long-term goal, and I can be transparent because everyone understands that. Okay, great. You're making no money. That's awesome. Not awesome, but versus my long-term goal is to definitely to be in the space. I love being in the media space. I've had a blast doing this past 9 months or whatever it's been now, and I would love to do it full time. But to do it full time, I have a family of 4. To do it full time, I need to make a decent amount of money in order to justify this. I have a good job. There's a reasonable conversation there, but to turn around and have a transparent audience, to have a transparent conversation with my audience at some point, but by the way, this is how much money I make doing this, it's a whole different conversation. I don't know if I ever would or will. I mean, the fact that I'm even having this conversation now is, I'm willing to do it because right now I make nothing.
And there's a core business thing that people need to remember too. The more you make of something, generally the cheaper it gets. Yes. Even if like when we were doing Pokemon back in the late 90s, right? All of the amortized cost, all of the one-time cost didn't matter because we were printing literally 1 billion cards in 1 month. Like we were printing so many cards, the guys in R&D realized it was more profitable to print Pokemon cards than $1 bills. So all those costs went to zero.
I just heard what you said. That was funny.
Yeah. You would assume that means we could lower our price. That's not how business works. We were making a thing that people couldn't get enough of, so Wizards of the Coast rightly raised the price 3 times in 6 months. I had to forget what the price increases were. And no one blinked. And, when people look, I don't think the small game companies get enough credit here on Kickstarter in particular. If I see a small game company and they come up with a game with 60 cards and someone says, that game should only be $9, I'm like, yeah, if they printed 1 million copies, but they're not going to print 1 million copies. And 60 cards from Wizards of the Coast for Magic cost you $15. I'm guessing. I don't know what the actual price of Magic is. But it's more than that. And they printed millions of cards. Like, I don't think people quite... And that comes back to putting your morality on how much someone should make for their job without all the facts. Like, I am happy to pay for small print run companies way more.
No, I've always said, vote with your dollar. The price of a good is the price someone's willing to pay for it. Going back to the guy in that Games Workshops, whatever. Going back to Steve on the Kickstarter. Yeah. The price of a good is the price people are willing to pay for it. Charging less can potentially bring value. It could potentially spread the word, and that's the business decision you have to make. Charging less than what someone is willing to pay for a product is you as a company doing charity, which I'm for charity, but I like to separate the two. Saying, hey, people think this thing is worth, let's just make up a number, $50, and then charging $30 is nice. It's nice, but that's you just doing them a favor. It's two different sides.
And if you have an owner or if you have a boss who is judging you based on profit, this is not my case in any way. If you are shareholders, like at Wizards of the Coast, we made decisions at Wizards of the Coast because we had shareholders, and that's a weird reason. And I will say sometimes people do charge way less than it costs to make them, but that's strategy. Yeah. Like, that's giving away starter decks to sell booster packs, right? That does happen.
For sure. I've talked to companies who say that we're starting on Kickstarter just because we want to get the word out there. We want to get the word out as a company, as a product. We need to break even on this first thing because we can't afford to lose, but that's fine. And that's, again, it's all part of, like you said, it's part of strategy. And no one owes you the product of their time, the product of their labor, the product of their risk. Risk is a factor as well. Anything that goes into these things it's hard. I just watched this Wormwood. I don't know if you've seen this Wormwood thing. Wormwood went up on a Kickstarter with a gaming table, and the first day it raised $4.5 million. And it's hard to not look at this and see this element of, why can't I have that kind of success? Why can't I have that? Why is like whatever's going on? But there's risk. People risk a lot to... I'm totally fine with profit. Any complaints, not complaints, anything I ever was talking about in terms of AEG, profit was never my thing. I believe a product is worth what people are willing to pay for it. Yeah.
That Wormwood thing is a good example. I don't think I do a lot of panel discussions. I teach now at a university, a local university, one class to sort of give back and try to get more people in this industry. And I hope that some people listening to this decide to jump in because the industry is great. There are lots of things there. But I tell people in my Kickstarter panels, what makes a Kickstarter successful is the work you do before it goes live.
Yeah.
And that work most people don't see. So Wormwood raised $4.5 million. That wasn't because in one day people stopped by. That was because they've been promoting
it for months. They have a YouTube channel. They built an entire product customizer for this product. They built a website. And my day job is building websites. I know how expensive they can cost. They built a custom functionality for their table. There's a lot going on, 100%.
They have an existing business. Working for AEG right now is a dream for me because they have internal resources, right? Like I was having the staff dress up like pirates for the live stream every day for the final campaign.
I saw
that.
It
was just I couldn't do that back at Fun to 11. Like when I ran Fun to 11, it was sort of a hobby company while I dealt with my toy industry clients. But I couldn't do any of this stuff. So I'm in hog heaven as a marketing guy to have AEG right now, all their resources, and they're just awesome. And they're a virtual company anyway. So when things got locked down, they were like, okay.
Let's just do it. What is your role at AEG? I don't think we talked about that.
So that's hard to describe.
Well, my wife still doesn't know what I do at my day job.
Yeah, I would say that this is fair. They hired me to be part of the leadership team and to run their Kickstarters. And the leadership team is just a group of 4 of us who get involved in higher level decision making. Because I've been in this industry since like 94, and I've known the 2 of the people on that leadership committee, Ryan and John, since about the same time. And we're good friends. We just have a trust. So I can get involved in some higher level questions on games I don't know without having to know them. So that's been helpful. So I would say I'm the Kickstarter person. So right now I'm prepping their next Kickstarter for Thunderstone Quest's next set of quests. And I'll tell you, this is actually an interesting point. So Thunderstone Quest's next Kickstarter should have the opposite feel of the Dead Reckoning campaign.
In what sense?
Because it's going to have like 700 cards or something, right? If you were going to buy 700 Magic cards, it would cost you $140, and it wouldn't come with plastic dividers, and it wouldn't come with this huge box. And it wouldn't come with support for a whole different game format that people play Thunderstone Quest in. And it'll be like $75. I'm like, this is if you judge a game by the number of the components, you're gonna be like, man, that's a deal. Like the thing's gonna, I don't know how much 700 card weighs, but it's gonna weigh like 9 pounds.
I've had Thunderstone Quest at one point. I know how much it weighs.
Yeah.
But before we go into that, just you mentioned the leadership team, and I want to quickly ask a question I should have asked beforehand. I completely forgot. How is I don't remember his name, the CEO. How's he doing?
John.
How's John doing?
Well, all early person. For those who don't know, he had a health issue on literally the last day of the Dead Reckoning Kickstarter. I would like to think that we were doing so well he went into shock, but that's not what happened. But he had some quick surgery, and thanks for asking. But he's doing well. He's back home. He's recovering. He's doing what you do. So
good. I remember I saw the news thing about it, and I hadn't heard anything since. Once you said leadership team, I was like, oh my gosh, I should ask.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do any more public press releases about staff health. That one was really important for us to do because John is not just the CEO; he interfaces with lots of people, and lots of people have only done games with AEG so they could work with John. So it was important for us to let them know that he was going to be out of the loop for a while.
Gotcha.
But man, it's a good reminder of what matters. Like for those of us who get mad at things, and Lord knows I get mad at things, where we choose to spend our rage points, pick the important things.
Yeah. So you're talking about Thunderstone Quest, the next Kickstarter?
Oh yes, that's my next product. So I would say that I'm the Kickstarter guy, and the one after that I'm working with as well, and I have a design background as well, so I can contribute. I can start to be contributing now on the design or development side, I should say, with some products a little bit. I definitely didn't do any of that with Dead Reckoning. I didn't do any of that with Thunderstone Quest, but with the one after that, at least I have some time to get involved, and which I love.
I will say I was involved in a Discord conversation where we were talking about, it came up as a complete accident, but we were just saying that we should have a dungeon crawl with card crafting. So if you want to make that happen, that would be nice.
Yeah, that's a thing. You could almost use most of the Dead Reckoning.
You could have the cost of both. You could have miniatures and cards.
Yeah, I don't know if AEG. I have to check this. So if I'm wrong, internet.
I don't think they have any dungeon crawls. If that's what you're gonna say.
No, I don't. No, they've done dungeon crawls.
They have.
But they did a game called Tomb a while back, long time ago.
Oh, Tomb! Wow, that's old. Okay, yeah.
That's old, yeah. But I don't know if they've done a big miniatures game. And there's a skill set with miniatures. It's not something you just are good at. Like if you look at the European companies that do a lot of miniatures, a lot of that is because they were that area of the world was known as experts for making models, like airplane models, and they had really good sculptors. So a lot of those companies have sculptors on staff.
All I'm saying is card crafting has clearly done well for AEG, and miniatures do well for a lot of companies. Just businessman to businessman, and also gamer because I want to play that game. Yeah, that'd be cool. Just saying.
It'll be $800, but
Just announce that day one and we're all good.
Sure. Just let everyone know right up front. I'd love that. I mean, I like I said, workshop is a thing for me. So I definitely have a miniatures history too. I love all that stuff. In fact, I have a ton of Games Workshop art in my office right now.
Cool.
Which is fun.
So there are a few points about Dead Reckoning I wanted to cover. Specific things I covered in my video. Just again, my whole video was based on why are there people who are upset, and there, like I said, as much as there was a ton of support, as much as it was AEG's highest funding campaign, I believe, and as much as it was tremendously successful, there were also a decent amount of people that were upset. There's a reason we came up with the gameplay pledge. It definitely brought a lot of backers back into the fold, and so some of those things is. So I think there's really two things primarily that I wanted to cover. And one is, the first one is setting expectations. That there were two main complaints that I brought up that I saw as well. Other people bringing it up as to why they were upset with the thing. It wasn't necessarily about the price point, because many of these people, like you and I have discussed already, many of these people have since backed the game, despite being upset. And the first, those setting expectation aspect came from, I think, two things, which is the wording on the initial pledge level was you're going to get everything in the daily discovery. And then secondly, and combined with that, the daily discovery proved to be a lot of different things. It was day one, we got a ton of content, and then day two was Sea Dogs, and day three it was Sea Dogs, and day four it was here we have a video, and day five is an optional buy. I think the expectations were very different. The reality was very different than the expectations throughout the campaign.
Yeah, I think those are two very legitimate. And the first one specifically was definitely an error on our part. I don't know if your listeners know, but there's some things you can change on your Kickstarter campaign during the campaign. So like when we update the graphics, we can change those whenever we want. Yeah. We can't change pledge levels. Once you have a pledge level, once the campaign starts, you can't change it. So we realized that was a mistake early on. There's just nothing we can do about it. And I think I know how he made the error on expectations. There's a product called Wonderland's War that was on Kickstarter not too long ago, and we really liked that campaign. Like, we really liked it. I mean, that campaign was beautiful, and they did the daily discovery thing as well, and it gave them something to talk about every day and to keep people engaged. Most people know that Kickstarters fund a lot at the beginning, and then almost nothing in the middle, and then
it's a curve.
Yeah, our middle was exceptionally good. Like, if you just look at raw data, if you go to click KickTrack or anything. And you compare us to even games that launched the same day. Games I really like, the Ascension Miniatures game, which looks great. If you just look at our little graph there, you'll see that our middle was super strong. So I feel like between the daily discovery and then us writing some sort of compelling fiction thing to keep people reading and to keep excitement up was good. The expectations thing was definitely a problem. And if I had to do it again, what I would have changed is I wouldn't put the first two big editions in the daily discovery. I just would have put them in the pledge level, right? Which were the Saga 1 and I think the Ghost Ship. I wouldn't have put them on the map. So then it just would have been a series of small little add-ons, and you would have felt like, oh, that's a small little thing, cool.
Which I think is reasonable. I mean, I think, and again, going into my own expectations, I backed Wonderland's War, and I had zero complaints about the process, because I think it was like, here you go, and here's a card, here's a card, here's a card. I'm all for. I'm generally for the transition from stretch goals to daily unlocks. I think stretch goals are generally a game, and I'm happy that even a company like Command is slowly moving that way as well. I think it lets people set. It lets the people in the campaign focus on the campaign and not on playing games. And I think it lets the backers not also have to sit there and, I mean, I've seen people on campaigns saying like, no, convince this person to up their pledge so we can get more stretch goals. I'm like, people, that's not what's actually happening here.
That's not what's happening. For those who don't know, the stretch goals are completely fake in almost every campaign.
Yeah,
like
there are exceptions, but I think they are the exceptions.
Almost every campaign.
Yeah.
So our mistake there, and I agree with you on both those points. Like I'm willing to own a mistake all day long. That's how we learn. It's how we get better. And I will get better, and we'll keep getting better, and we'll keep making mistakes. Every time you try something new, it's a question. I think the other really big mistake we made is we did not anticipate the all-in game pledge, the all-game pledge, at all. and we did listen to the backers. Now, some backers might think we weren't listening because we don't go in and get involved in all the comments directly. We definitely listened. And, we talked about it, and we made that happen, and we're glad we did. A lot of backers took that option, which is awesome.
Yeah, something like 1,000 plus, something in that range.
600 maybe? 700?
Still high. I am not a fan.
That. I don't know. Don't hold me to that.
Sometimes that happens in campaigns where a company will offer an asked for pledge level, and then they'll get like 20 people jumping in. And I'm like, that's a common example of the vocal minority and companies trying to pivot and then setting themselves up for a liability now that they have to adjust to these 15 people. But that definitely wasn't the case here. There were a lot of people who took that up.
Yeah, the worst is when someone says you should do a play mat as an add-on. And this is the kind of mistakes that I say when you plan a Kickstarter campaign, these bigger ones, you have to plan every day out well before you start, right? So if you add a comment, I'd like a neoprene mat for this game. And so someone says, great, we'll make it $9, $10, $14, whatever. Yeah. And then 18 people buy them.
It's tremendously expensive.
Yeah, your minimum order quantity is going to be a couple hundred, so you lose so much money.
That's another feature that Kickstarter should add, the ability to set a minimum backer quantity. That'd be a great feature.
Oh, that would be an awesome feature. Yeah.
Because I think so often that I think many of these pivots, companies would have an easier time making it if they can make it conditional.
Yeah, that actually is a great idea, especially for add-on stuff like the coins. The reason the coins and what's the other great? The cargo stuff ends up mostly being sold in bundles, and honestly, at very, very little margin. Those coins and cargo are insanely expensive. Is because then we know we'll get enough quantity done that we can actually make them. Because if we had 85 people want coins, we'd have to. We'd just be burning money all day long.
This is something, again, going back to Come On, something I talk about in the campaigns a lot is the optional buys always cost more proportionally because less people are buying them. Of course, they can give you an amazing content at the $99 base entry level, and then suddenly it's $40 for 4 extra minis because people want people. Yeah, it's quantities. It's quantities.
Yeah, it does make a big difference, and for them, it's amortizing the cost of those sculpts over a much smaller number of bits, and they might want to put that in retail someday.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these things will never show up retail. Like we know the Go ship that we did will never show up at retail unless it's part of a package that gets sold to retail. Yeah, I don't know if we're doing. I know we have some retail plans, but I couldn't tell you if it's for the base game or
for Dead Reckoning?
Legendary Pledge. I gotta check that out. It's very small though. It's only retail stores who buy directly from us. For those of you who don't know, obviously you do know, when you sell a product to a distributor, for every $10 the product would cost you as an MSRP, the company only gets $4. When you sell it directly to a retail store, you get about $5. So we can't. The margins are so.
Of a retailer pledge level, effectively.
Yes, yeah. So if you have a retailer pledge level, Kickstarter gets 9% of that too. So it gets pretty brutal. This is not a game that we could ever, like I said, do only in retail. And our retail sales, if you see it at a retail store, I know that a few retail stores have contacted us. We are essentially doing that as a service to those retail stores. It's not a business. Mm-hmm. It's AEG does a lot of business with retailers, so we need to be nice to them when we can.
Sure. Cool.
That's something that a lot of people also don't understand. Like when we worked at Wizard of the Coast, we had Pokemon, right? And the buyers at like a Walmart or a Target would be pressuring us to lower our prices. And we had said no, and they got confused. And then I worked with toy companies, making games for them. And whenever the buyers pressured the toy companies said, sure, we'll give you a lower price because we want you to still keep selling our other line, our Barbies and our everything else. So.
And are there plans for Dead Reckoning second Kickstarter? Or is that?
It's got to happen.
I imagine it's got. It's most successful by now, and you've done Edge of Darkness twice, so. Yeah,
I kind of feel, and I don't want to. It's a game I really like, and I don't want to set expectations too high, but I kind of feel like this is AEG's Scythe. I feel like
I've played the game. I loved it. I thought it was incredible.
It ticks a lot of the boxes that Scythe ticks, and I think it's going to continue to get really good reviews. So if I was setting a plan for that, instead of just being told what to do, I would say, let the game come out, let more people see it, have the community tell us all of our spelling errors in the rule book, which always happens. That's. We tend to translate the game into French and German, and it's not easy to print a rule book when you can't read it. Yeah, so
the gameplay video I did with Quackalope, apparently we made like 7 mistakes in how to play it, so it's all good. I understand mistakes.
Yeah. So we'll get out feedback. We'll clarify the rules, and then go to Kickstarter after that. And then we'll obviously have to have some new content too. So every time we do the base game, we'll do new content as well. which is probably another saga or two.
Yeah, the sagas is the one thing I'm curious. I know there are a bunch of designer posts about it. I haven't looked into it heavily. The sagas are definitely the thing I'm intrigued by. I don't know if it's going to be something that makes the game better for me, or I'm going to feel like it's a complete, waste, or however it plays out.
Yeah, it's such an interesting way to experience an expansion. I was unfamiliar with sagas at all until I played the Shy Pluto saga.
Is it similar to that, or it's very different? I thought it was very different.
It's like that in the way that you play in order, and then every time at the end of your game, you keep all the new components in the game, and then you keep going. But it's different in that it's not a set level of components that get added every time. Gotcha. So it's more like you're discovering the pages of a book in a random order.
Which I think I prefer. I mean, I played Shy Pluto, and I like legacy games a lot. Shy Pluto I was less enthused about. It wasn't bad. I prefer more of a, I guess, narrative to why things are changing in my game, even though I'm not a narrative person in general, which is interesting.
Yeah. I enjoyed Shy Pluto, but when I play the game regularly, I don't use the extra Shy Pluto thing because it's just easier to teach a new player. Sure. And there's always like one new person at the table every time I play something usually.
And so then the other thing I want to ask about is MSRP. Now, again, MSRP is a fun one because I understand MSRP is a framework. It's a reference. It's not, especially when it's not really going to retail. Like it's just it's an operational number to set an expectation for people. At the same time, I think to a certain degree, that operational number didn't set the expectation for Dead Reckoning. What I mean by that is day one, jumping from $79 to $109, that $30 bump bought you a $93 increase in MSRP between the saga, the ghost ship, the sleeves, the old sea dogs. And then day whatever, at the end of the campaign, when Saga 2 came out, $45 bought you $45, unless, of course, you went all in. So, like, what's the deal with the MSRP and the difference in your own expectations that are being set through MSRP?
Sure. So, the challenge with MSRP is twofold. It's like level one challenge is, I know some of these things, I should say, I'm 95% confident that many of these things will never get to retail because the margins just aren't good enough. Sure. Certainly the Ghost Ship, I can't imagine that ever getting to retail. So there is some amount of we make up an MSRP, right? And that's just how it happens. The second level is we're doing bundling. So in any bundling operation, you are choosing to give people a deal if they order more stuff. So when you're only offering bundles, and you have MSRPs, it's like you're trying to solve a two-variable problem. So you could either look at the Legendary Pledge and say, wow, to go from Legendary to game only, you lose some number of dollars of MSRP and you gain some number of dollars of MSRP for a cost that looks that way, right?
Sure.
But if you use that same logic and said, well, if I choose Legendary and I want to get rid of all the stuff in Legendary I don't want and just get the base game, all of a sudden the base game price is down at like $42, right? So it was one of those cases where it was a point that people could say, hey, this doesn't seem right. Sure. But they were being very selective in how they looked at it, because if they looked at it the other way, from base game to Legendary, they would say, well, why is the base game $79? If these MSRPs are true, that base game should only be, what would that be, 45? What do you say, $90 more? Yeah. It should be $13. You're just taking MSRP off.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's just a different way to look at it. At the end of the day, all of the MSRPs are what we think what it would cost if the thing made it to retail. So we're going to have a very different margin on our SKUs. We always do. Like, we make a different margin on Tiny Town than we make on Space Base. It's just the way the industry works out. We would make a very different margin selling a Ghost Ship to retail. We'd have to invent a box for it or packaging. We'd have to do a bunch of stuff.
Because right now it's basically like strapped to the side or shrink wrapped to the side.
Yes, but if we were just selling just that thing, right, it would need a package. It would need some other stuff. Where the cargo and the coins are a terrible margin, like really bad. There's a reason that the Scythe cargo doesn't end up in retail. Like, you can buy it, but you have to buy it directly from the publisher, I think,
to
for
cut
20
out the extra costs. Interesting.
Yes,
I never even looked into that. I never even realized that it was only available direct from publisher.
Yeah, I think so. Direct from publisher or the manufacturer. I think they license it off, but I can guarantee you no one can sell metal coins at the cost that we put in that campaign at retail. But nobody would believe us if we put MSRP for those coins at $49, which would be a pretty standard markup, I think, because they would look at the Scythe coins and say they're $30. But yeah, the Scythe coins sell direct because that's the only way to make any money on them.
This is actually something I talked about, the concept of Kickstarter pricing. I've talked about in the past in a video I did on Kickstarter deals and where have they gone and whatever. And I talked about the premise of you can't slash a price on Kickstarter too much because then it destroys what happens to your game aftermarket. Just because you're cutting out middlemen, you still have to factor in the general lifetime cycle of a product.
Yeah, I love your channel because you're the only person I know who looks at resale value as, and I said as a bit of a car guy earlier, right? That's a huge deal for the car community. Right, but obviously you don't have as many cars as you have board games. But the idea is interesting because I don't see anybody else doing that.
My thing is, I back a lot of Kickstarters. I buy a lot of games. I cycle my collection. This would be an expensive hobby for me if I didn't factor those things in. And then when I first started my channel, I didn't talk about it at all. But it slowly entered into some conversations here and there, and people gravitated towards it. And I was like, wow, this is something that isn't... I lucked into this, honestly, to a degree. I lucked into an aspect of the hobby that no one talks about. I didn't realize that.
It's interesting. I think your channel will attract people who are very cost-focused. So you will get a lot of people who think things are too expensive and are vocal about it.
Sure.
But also, you could get a lot of speculators. People who are thinking, I could buy this game. I could play it for 2 months and sell it for what I paid for it.
And I try not to address that sector. I bring it up briefly in like the side, like, or if you just want to, but primarily because to me, while I have no problem with speculating, I have no problem with anyone trying to make money. I'm totally fine with it. But at the same time, for me, the hobby is not about that. To me, the hobby is about the fun, the enjoyment. Everything I do in this channel is centered around the idea that I'm just having fun. I just want to continue to have fun, and that's my focus. My focus is not a monetary channel. It is a fun-based channel while trying to be monetary guided. So
be responsible.
So I have no problem with speculators. It's just my content will never address or focus on speculation. Yeah,
that's good. I mean, that's a fair base because really, at the end of the day, we all make our own value decision on whether a thing is worth, like we said a bunch of times. So back to your point about MSRPs. Yeah. My advice to people out there is if you're looking at a campaign, you can pay attention to MSRPs in the sense of, does that feel about right? If that was at retail, does that feel about right to me? Or does it feel too expensive? And if it feels too expensive, just make up your own MSRP for what you think the thing would be worth, and then judge your value on that. It's the MSRP one was tough for this one. Because like we both said, they're 100,000% fake on Kickstarter in particular.
It's a factor. It's a mental guideline.
Yeah. But it's fake, but it's not made up, if that makes sense. Yes. Like there is math in the background, and I know no one will believe me when I say this. But oh my God, Dead Reckoning, the base box, if we sold that normally with our normal margins, that thing would be so much more expensive than $99 at retail. I mean, every time, and I love John Clare for this. John Clare, the game designer, if you don't know, makes the best looking prototypes I've ever seen. His prototypes are immaculate. And he designed the ship. Game designers don't normally design the actual ship that things drop in.
The actual ship?
Yeah, that's crazy. Impressive. Yeah, and I should say, not but, and when we make his games, we generally take exactly what he's done and turn it into the game. So you are really seeing one man's vision for how a product should be. That's not normally the way games get made. Normally, someone pitches you a game, you say, I like the mechanics, and then if they have a clever, cool box to hold resources in, you don't care. You're just going to say, look, just make a pile of these and a pile of those on your table. Why are we going to spend 75 more cents to put those boxes in there? But with John Clare games, we put in basically exactly what he designs. So there's all these things in that game that are just awesome, cool, neat, more expensive than you would think. And could never make that game. There's a reason most John Clare games go through Kickstarter.
What has he done outside card crafting? I'm not actually sure.
Well, all those card crafting games have gone through Kickstarter. So he did Space Base is his game. Mm-hmm. He did a game for another publisher. I don't remember what it was called. Heroes? He did Custom Heroes. I think Custom Heroes actually went to retail. Mystic Veil went to retail. Actually, Mystic Veil is interesting. Mystic Veil was his first pitched game was Edge of Darkness. And then this is the story I've heard. AEG loved that game so much, but they said people will never understand this game. Take this card crafting thing you've designed and make a simpler game so we can teach card crafting, and then we'll do Edge of Darkness.
Interesting. That's funny.
Yeah,
I like the story. I don't know if it's true, but I like it.
No, it's definitely true. I just wasn't there for it,
Gotcha.
so I had no part in that decision.
Cool.
All right, I think you have one other thing you said.
One last thing, because I know we're running short, we're running low on time. Last thing is there was a thread on Board Game Geek that between screenshots, normally I wouldn't even bring this up unless there was some evidence, but there seemed to be some evidence that it seemed basically after the campaign ended, AEG seemed to like kick out a backer or refund a pledge. And is that true?
100%. Yeah. So sure. I mean, so let me throw my standard disclaimer right there. I was not the person who made that call. Couldn't even tell you who the person was who got booted. We are not allowed during a campaign to push someone out of our campaign, which is the number 2 most requested feature of people who make Kickstarters. There are people who ruin the fun for people. And I would say that
you're kind of answering. I had a follow-up question, which was going to be meaning, I guess to cut to the point. I don't. We'll get into I guess what happened in a second. But to me, I'm also focused on what just makes sense for a company to do. I'm also focused on that.
Yes.
I'm not purely coming from the consumer side. I'm looking at both. And for me, my follow-up question was going to be, why did you wait till after the campaign? That just seems stupid. But you're saying you can't.
You can't. But you can, when a campaign ends, refund a pledge. And AEG is very clear in their Kickstarters. They have a sort of guidelines there. I can't speak to which thing that the person who refunded the campaign. It's just, the person who made that call is literally 3,400 miles away from me. I don't know.
So you just don't know what the reason was?
I don't know the exact reason, no. I had nothing to do with it. I was just told, just so you know, and I think it was 2 people that I know of.
I only saw evidence of one. I believe there were 2 said. I only saw evidence from one.
Yeah. And I believe they were both $5 pledges, so we gave them their money back. We view Kickstarter still has some of that collaborative magic, and much like back in the day when I was at my Games Workshop store, if someone just came into the Games Workshop store and complained all the time, the Games Workshop employees would get rid of them. They'd say, you can't come to our store. There's a concept in business that is unpopular to say, but is very true, which is sometimes you have to fire a customer because they're not worth the hassle. And my guess would be the person who made the call based on that. And again, I take none of this to the bank.
I can't. I mean, since you don't know exactly what the call, I can't overly go into that. But yeah.
But I think the point is sound, and the fact that so like I talked to literally someone earlier today who asked me the same question. Did you really do that? And I said, yeah. But then I have no problem telling you that we did it and why. And that person had run a Kickstarter for their channel. And he's like, man, I would have loved to have done that.
I've fired customers. It's rare. It's definitely rare. But my thing, again, I was focused on 2 aspects, which I guess one you answered and one we can't address, which is firing customers I completely get. Sometimes you just don't want to deal with toxic people. My thing was going to be more like why after instead of doing when the person is being toxic, which you addressed. Yeah. And then what was the reason, which we don't have that conversation. So that's fine. Yeah,
I think the reason can be summarized as bad for the community.
Okay.
You've decided to be bad. Because remember, this Kickstarter community is going to continue well after this.
Sure.
Right? Just put out an update a couple days ago with the results of the last backer vote. There'll probably be more fun things for Kickstarter backers to do. And I want, and AEG wants to create an environment of people who are excited about what they're doing. I think it's telling that this person who, complained a bunch during the campaign was upset that they got their $5 back, which probably meant they were going to back the game. And they're upset about that. If that's you and you're listening, I think you can just go to the late pledge and still get a copy of the game if you really want to. My guess is you don't. But if you do, that's fine. You just won't be part of that Kickstarter community that is there doing, supporting each other and being excited about a product, right? And I think it's rational to let businesses make that call of what kind of environment they want to encourage.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. And I think I had some follow-up questions I was going to end with, but I think we talked with them. I was going to say, what's next for AEG? And you said Thunderstone Quest.
Oh, sure.
I was going to talk about Dead Reckoning back on Kickstarter, but I asked that earlier. So I guess just lastly, what's the last game you've played?
Oh, I played Tiny Towns at 3 p.m. today.
Oh, good. Very nice.
For those of you who don't know, AEG does a live stream every day at 3 p.m. East Coast. They do Tiny Towns Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. They do Santa Monica on Wednesday, and every Friday they do Space Base, using the solo rules I invented.
You like the solo rules for Tiny Towns?
For Space. It's not solo. They're not solo rules. They're a way to play live with everyone. So you get your own copy of the game. You set it up. I mean, all I did was make it possible to play John's awesome game. But it wasn't a stretch. But it's really fun. It's fun to play like in this time of social isolation.
Yeah.
To sit in your basement, or where I said basement because that's literally where I'm in my basement.
It's all good.
Yeah. I'm not. I don't want to use the basement dweller like derogatory term. But you know, my daughter and I come down and we log on to the AEG thing and we play along with other people and chat it up. It's kind of nice.
Nice. Very cool.
What about you? What was the last game you played?
Oh, I should have thought of an answer to my own question. I played something online. I played Bunny Kingdoms by Richard Garfield. I played Bunny Kingdoms by Richard Garfield 2 nights ago on Tabletop Simulator, which half of my gaming has migrated to Tabletop Simulator or Yucata or Board Game Arena or any of those places. I still play online with my wife and then a select handful of people that we're like social distancing with, but it's primarily, like I said, like a game night. I moved online because we could, and until we're ready to get to a point where I feel totally comfortable, let's do what we can. It's a hybrid. Yeah. Everything's it's a challenge. The whole thing's a challenge. Yeah. Yeah,
and I want to be clear. If somebody was on our campaign and they were upset, I want to be clear that I hold zero grudges against anybody. I think this is a time where we all have to be extra patient with people because, man, this is just insanely stressful right now. And you know, if this is being a gamer means games are, if you define yourself through your hobbies, which we all do, basically, like I'm guessing no one could describe you without using the word gamer. Probably. Somewhere plays games in the first 2 sentences, right? It'd be
my basement.
You know,
full, that's why I
family. What's your job? Plays games, right? That's. I mean,
if you ask my daughter, her order is family, coffee, board games. That's her order.
Cheers. Yeah. so it does become part of our personality, and we can get very passionate about that. So if the Dead Reckoning campaign was something that you were passionate about and you really wished you could afford it and it could be a little bit cheaper, or you just thought it should be cheaper, and there's no grudges held by anybody here against anybody. And even if you're one of those 1 or 2 people that we got out of the campaign, we welcome you back into any Kickstarter. We just want to keep it more positive. And my personal suggestion is if you're following a game and it's making you agitated, follow another game, man. There's a million other awesome games out there that should make you excited. We should be excited about what we buy. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Our hobby is awesome.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I have my own list of videos I just haven't figured out how to approach it, but a conversation. I want to have a conversation about why Kickstarter comments can be so negative and what we can do to potentially improve it. And again, I have no problem with feedback. I have no problem with protesting. Not protesting. Protesting sounds a little too vocal. I have no problem with having conversations or disagreements. I just like them to be respectful.
Yeah, and I will say that cost is probably the hardest one to have a discussion about, because the things that go into why the companies set their cost, you will never know. It's probably best for you just to say, this game is too expensive for me to value it at a point that I would buy it. It's not helpful to say this game is too expensive, because you just don't know what the company's dealing with. Like, if your company provides health insurance like AEG does, it's
expensive.
Yeah.
I don't offer health insurance. I mean, we have like 5 employees, and I wish we could offer health insurance. I wish. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you don't want to be making your decision to complain about price without understanding that what the company is doing with that money is paying people's health insurance. Like this is just not, it's not helpful to you or to the company or to people who love the product. But the other stuff, like, hey, I'd like a game only pledge, I'm on. Like, yeah, we'll keep those comments coming, because that was awesome.
Cool. Luke, this has been fun. Thank you so much for hopping on. I enjoyed this tremendously. It was insightful, helpful. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks. It's great talking to you.
All right. Everyone else, this has been Alex from BoardGameCo. You can subscribe down below. You know the deal. Subscribe, like, comment. Tell me all the things I should have given Luke a hard time about that I didn't, but that's just not what I'm going to do. Again, I've said this. I said this to you, Luke. I mean, this is fun for me. Getting onto any kind of conversation that is confrontational, I just don't do. I have conversations. I don't have fights. And until next time, have a good one.